Lesson 37 is entitled Training in GMP Regulated Industries. The topics covered in today's lesson include a discussion around the driving forces behind the need for training, regulatory requirements for training. We will discuss some training policies and discuss the training cycle and what's involved, training needs analysis, different types of training and how they're delivered, and finally the assessment and recording of training or the documentation of same. The first thing we need to understand is the difference between skill, knowledge and attitude, and how those three things combine to create what we call a good training program. So the definition of skill is developed aptitude or ability in a particular intellectual or physical field. The second definition is knowledge, information which is specific to a subject, enabling you to understand a subject to an acceptable level. Attitude then is an internal state which affects your choice of action towards some objects, persons, or events. And finally, training is the provision of experiences and opportunities to help learners to learn specific skills and knowledge and to develop appropriate attitudes. So skills, knowledge, and attitude are intercombined to create a good training program within any organization. Some of the driving forces behind creating a good training program within any organization is the requirement to comply with GMP regulations, as well as the requirement to comply with quality assurance guidance documents. Finally, financial targets are an obvious one for ensuring your workforce is trained appropriately and adequately to ensure you get right first time product. And OSHA concerns, which deal with occupational safety and health. The work of the Health and Safety Authority is aimed at bringing about a change of culture where proactive management of the workplace safety, health and welfare is viewed by all as making a significant contribution to the long-term success of any business or organisation. And in fact, some of the most successful companies in Ireland are those which place a strong emphasis on employee safety and health and aim to achieve a zero OSHA rate, as we call it. The EU requirements are listed below. It's taken from the guidance document. The link is here, and again that will be included in the supplementary material. But the reference I've taken out of it is as follows. The manufacturer should provide training for all the personnel whose duties takes them into production and storage areas or into control laboratories, including the technical, maintenance and cleaning personnel, and for other personnel whose activities could affect the quality of the product. Continuing training should also be given, and its practical effectiveness should be periodically assessed. GMP training at induction level is usually considered appropriate for new employees, as well as GMP training for contractors working on site. And we should also consider GMP refresher training for those employees or contractors who are currently trained on procedures, but perhaps the SOP has been updated, a new piece of equipment has been purchased, or perhaps the regulations have changed. So we need to consider refresher training or upskilling when required. The ISO 13485 reference is listed here, and this is the ISO guidance document for medical devices. In general, personnel performing work affecting product quality shall be competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, skills and experience. Competence awareness training. The organisation shall determine the necessary competence for personnel performing work affecting product quality. They shall provide training or take other actions to satisfy these needs. The organisation shall evaluate the effectiveness of the training actions taken. The organisation shall ensure that its personnel are aware of the relevance and importance of other activities and how they contribute to the achievement of the quality objectives. And the organisation shall maintain appropriate records or documentation of education, training, both in-house and external, skills and experience of all their personnel. So each organisation should contain or should have a training policy document. It's a high-level document outlining the following: the commitment of the company to the training and development of all employees, training that is achievable or available or which the organisation intends to provide, the purpose of the training and how this process relates to the overall vision and aims of the organisation. So a typical policy statement on training and development by an organisation normally recognises that its most important resource is its employees. It normally states in the policy that it's committed to the training and development of its entire workforce so that they will gain the necessary skills to reach their full potential and their development needs. This will ultimately assist the organisation in achieving its main objectives through a well-trained and supported working team. So by increasing the skills and knowledge of its staff, the organization will produce confident, highly qualified staff working as an effective and efficient team. Systematic training. For training to be effective, it must be planned in a systematic and objective manner. Training programs should be available, approved by either the head of production or head of quality control as appropriate. And again, that's one of the requirements of the EU guidance document. In systematic training, everything is planned in a logical, step-by-step sequence. And another important thing to note is that employees are often asked to provide feedback on the value and effectiveness of the training that they've taken, as well as their development plans. And this information is normally used to improve the training process and is fed back into the systematic planning of the training throughout the organization. So identify the training needs. Training needs analysis includes detailed analysis of the area that is being looked at and the appropriateness of the training for that particular skill set. It needs to be tailored to the individuals working in that area, and we need to include a recognition that the trainers also need to be fully trained in the technique in which they're training other people in. Ongoing training needs analysis. So when training has been set up and the plan is put in place, you need to continually monitor the effectiveness of your training plan. And some of the ways to do that is to are detailed as follows. So response to gaps identified in the individual's skill base, response to gaps identified in a particular working area, maintaining skills for trained personnel. Trends and deviations might show up areas of deficiencies in training. Trends in customer complaints is another important one that we can look at. Response to rejected batches. Any particular process that's generating more rejected batches than would be considered the norm. Response to changing demands on the company, and response to self-inspections or external regulatory body inspections would throw up maybe some training needs also. So providing the training, who provides the training and how do we ensure that the trainer is adequately trained? So there are different types of training that's considered, and one of the first ones is induction training, and this is generally aimed at the new recruit or the new employee and covers general aspects of the company as well as more specific aspects of the job. Retraining programs involves covering some of the same ground as induction programs and generally ensures that the standards are set that have been set during induction training are maintained. Upgrading programs. As technology develops, staff have to be trained to make the best use of new machinery, new technology, new software, etc. Development programs. These are aimed at staff who are about to be promoted to new responsibilities, so they need to their development program would include upskilling in a new area or a new technique that they may not be familiar with. The delivery of training is normally delivered through various different options. Some of them listed here are courses, internal or external, workshops, another important one, as well as seminars, training films or audio tapes where you could watch how a particular action is carried out, reading material, simulations of on-the-job training, actual on-the-job training or shadowing a trained analyst, team building exercises. A response to the training need, establishing what sort of training will be provided, when it will be provided, who will provide it, and how it's being provided needs to be considered when you're deciding how you're going to deliver your training. One of the most common types of training within a laboratory environment, for example, would be on-the-job training. So the analyst would initially be involved in an introduction to the technique. They would be required to read all the standard operating procedures associated with that particular assay. And if it's an operator, they'd have to read through the batch manufacturing record also to make sure that they're familiar with the layout of the process. Demonstration is where an analyst would shadow a trained analyst. So you work with the trainer or your coach. You would then move forward to work alone under the trainer or the coach's supervision. Normally an assessment is carried out, whether that be a written assessment or an online assessment, and finally your training is signed off and you're allowed work independently. The coach or trainer is normally a trained analyst within the laboratory that is current in the procedures within a certain training module, and that person is deemed appropriate by area supervision to carry out training of the new analyst. The trained analyst will normally supervise and mentor the analyst throughout each procedure and each step, and will subsequently review and sign off the assessment, but the area supervisor will formally approve the training at the end. So what happens if the analyst fails to meet any of the qualification assessments during training? Normally, failure to carry out any of the aspects within the training course or failure to meet any of the pre-approved specifications will normally mean that the trainee would not be granted electronic access to the IT systems. So if they are using Empower, for example, to run a HPLC or GC, and they have failed some of the acceptance criteria during training, well, then they won't be granted access to that particular software package until training is repeated. Or if a trainee fails to meet specified acceptance criteria on, say, for example, balance weighing techniques, firstly, an attempt is made to try and identify the cause of the failure prior to retraining and reassessment. And an analyst obviously can't carry out any testing of GMP samples until they are fully trained in the balance weighing technique and meet all the pre-approved specifications under training. Requalification. So if a procedure within any particular module is updated for any reason, the approval process for procedure changes requires an assessment of training needs to be made by area supervision. It's normally assessed if within the area if qualified personnel need requalification on the procedure if there is a major change. So how do we do training assessments? So to determine the effectiveness of your training, we normally look at confirmation of understanding by the trainee. Sometimes the trainee needs to fill in a questionnaire on the theoretical elements of the training. It may be an IT assessment, it may be a multi-choice question format, and practical demonstration is an important way to ensure that your analyst is capable of carrying out the technique, and analysis of the data will mean that they're reaching the specified criteria as outlined in the training program. Actually, before I go on to the next slide, one of the ways of ensuring that your training assessment is adequate would be to look at monitoring, say, lab deviations on a quarterly basis for trends or recurrence, which may highlight the need for retraining of qualified personnel, or look at how effective your training plan actually is for training new analysts. So the requalification of personnel should be monitored routinely and documented. So the documentation of training records should include the description of the training subject matter, what it is you're being trained on, the reference to the relevant approved documents or standard operating procedures that were used, which is normally quite an extensive list of SOPs, along with the revision numbers that were used, signature of the trainer and the trainee, and how long the training took. So normally we do start date and finish date of training, and verification that the training was effective. So all specification criteria was met during training. And that's the last slide on training. Thank you for listening.